Part 1. The Whispers of Solomon. Jerusalem, a city etched in stone and sunlight, steeped in history and whispering with secrets. For centuries, its name has resonated with power, a place where faith and legend intertwine, where the echoes of empires long gone still linger in the narrow, winding streets. And beneath those streets, a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers, a subterranean world holding mysteries even more profound. It was to one of these hidden places, a vault whispered to have been constructed by the Knights Templar themselves, that I ventured. A place spoken of only in hushed tones, its location known to a select few, a place shrouded in myth and speculation. The journey began, as so many journeys do, with a whisper, a fragment of a conversation overheard in a dimly lit cafe in the Armenian Quarter. A mention of a forgotten map, a cryptic reference to the Sword of Solomon. Intrigued, I followed the threads of this whispered information, each clue leading me deeper into the labyrinth of Jerusalem's hidden past. Weeks turned into months, the pursuit becoming an obsession. I pored over ancient texts, consulted with historians and archaeologists, each conversation adding another piece to the puzzle, revealing a glimpse of something extraordinary lying beneath the city. The Templars, the warrior monks who once protected pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land, had left behind more than just stories and crumbling fortresses. They had left behind a legacy, a hidden truth buried deep within the earth. The Templars. Their name evokes images of chivalry and courage, but also secrecy and mystery. Founded in the 12th century, they rose to prominence quickly, amassing wealth and power through shrewd financial dealings and military prowess. They were the guardians of sacred relics, the protectors of the Holy Grail, according to some. Their sudden downfall, orchestrated by King Philip IV of France, has been the subject of countless books and debates. Were they heretics, as the king claimed? Or were they victims of a conspiracy, their wealth and power coveted by a greedy monarch? The truth, like so much else about the Templars, remains elusive. But beneath the surface of historical accounts and academic theories, there persisted a different kind of narrative, one passed down through generations in hushed whispers. This was the story of a secret vault, a hidden chamber beneath Jerusalem, where the Templars concealed their most prized possessions, their most closely guarded secrets. Some claimed it held the Ark of the Covenant, others whispered of a vast treasure, the accumulated wealth of the order. Still others believed it contained knowledge, ancient wisdom passed down from Solomon himself. It was this vault, this repository of secrets, that I sought. The search led me to a forgotten corner of the city, a place where ancient stones met modern concrete, where the past and present seemed to merge. A crumbling building, its facade scarred by time and neglect, held the key, I was told. Beneath its foundations lay the entrance to the Templar vault. Gaining access was a challenge in itself, requiring a delicate dance of diplomacy, persuasion, and perhaps a touch of subterfuge. But finally, after months of searching, I stood before a hidden doorway, a portal to the past. The air was thick with anticipation, the silence broken only by the distant sounds of the city above. The door, heavy and iron-bound, creaked open reluctantly, revealing a narrow, descending passageway. A single torch, its flickering flame casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls, was my only guide. As I descended, the air grew cooler, the silence deeper, broken only by the sound of my own breathing and the rhythmic thud of my heart against my ribs. The weight of history pressed down upon me, the centuries of secrets contained within this hidden place, palpable, almost suffocating. I was entering a realm unknown, a place where myth and reality blurred, where the whispers of the past promised to reveal truths long concealed. The Templar Vault awaited. I entered the Templar Vault under Jerusalem, Part 2 of 25. The air in the tunnel grew colder, biting at exposed skin. My headlamp beam, swallowed by the oppressive darkness just a few feet ahead, cast long, dancing shadows that writhed like spectral figures. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic thud of my own heart and the occasional scrape of my boots against the uneven stone floor. I could still smell the faint, unsettling odor, metallic, almost like blood, but with an underlying sweetness that was deeply disturbing. The tunnel continued its downward spiral, the air growing thicker, heavier. I felt a growing unease, a primal fear gnawing at the edges of my reason. This wasn't just a forgotten passage, it felt wrong, as if the very stones themselves were imbued with a malignant presence. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened into a vast, subterranean chamber. My headlamp, inadequate for such a space, revealed only a fraction of its immensity. Giant pillars, carved with intricate, unsettling designs, rose into the darkness, supporting a vaulted ceiling that was lost in the shadows. The air here was stagnant and heavy, laden with the same sickly sweet metallic scent, now amplified tenfold. I swept the beam of my lamp across the chamber, the light catching on strange, glinting objects scattered across the floor. As I drew closer, I realized they were fragments of bone, bleached white by time. Human bones. A wave of nausea washed over me. How many had died here? What horrors had this chamber witnessed? A low, guttural growl resonated from the darkness, sending a shiver down my spine. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I swung the headlamp around, frantically searching for the source of the sound, but saw nothing. Just shadows. Shifting, menacing shadows that seemed to watch me from the corners of my vision. The growl came again, closer this time, followed by the distinct sound of something dragging across the stone floor. Terror gripped me, paralyzing me in place. I wanted to run, to scream, but I couldn't. I was trapped, alone in this unholy place with something. Finally, I forced myself to move, backing away slowly, my eyes fixed on the darkness. The dragging sound continued, growing louder, closer, and then I saw it. A shape emerged from the shadows, a hulking, grotesque figure that defied description. It was humanoid, but twisted and deformed, its limbs elongated and misshapen. Its skin was pale and translucent, stretched taut over protruding bones. Its head, my stomach churned. Its head was a skull, devoid of flesh, the empty sockets staring blankly ahead. The creature dragged itself towards me, its movements jerky and unnatural. The growl emanated from its open maw, a sound that seemed to claw at my sanity. I stumbled backward, tripping over a pile of bones and falling heavily to the ground. My headlamp clattered away, plunging me into near-total darkness. Blindly, I scrambled for the light, my fingers brushing against something cold and smooth. I grasped it, fumbled with the switch, and the beam flickered back to life. The creature was looming over me, its skeletal face inches from mine. The stench of decay was overpowering. I could see the faint flicker of something within its empty eye sockets. A malevolent intelligence that chilled me to the bone. It raised a clawed hand, its touch promising unimaginable pain, and I screamed, a primal, desperate scream that echoed through the vast chamber. And then, just as the creature was about to strike, a deep, resonant voice boomed from the darkness. "Begone, foul beast! This hallowed ground is not yours to defile." The creature recoiled, as if struck by an invisible force, letting out a high-pitched shriek that grated on my ears. It turned and fled back into the shadows, its dragging form disappearing into the darkness. I lay there, gasping for breath, my body trembling uncontrollably. The voice, though powerful and commanding, held a chilling echo of something ancient and otherworldly. I slowly sat up, my headlamp beam sweeping across the chamber, searching for the source of the voice. And then I saw him. Standing near one of the massive pillars was a figure cloaked in shadow. The faint light of my headlamp revealed only glimpses of his form, a tall, imposing figure with a stern, unyielding presence. He held a long, slender staff in one hand, its tip glowing with an ethereal light. He did not speak, but his eyes, burning with an otherworldly intensity, met mine. Who was this mysterious figure? Was he friend or foe? I didn't know, but one thing was certain. I was trapped in a nightmare, and my journey into the depths of the Templar Vault had only just begun. I entered the Templar Vault under Jerusalem, Part 3. The chanting intensified, resonating through the stone in a way that seemed to vibrate within my very bones. It was a language I didn't recognize, guttural and rhythmic, punctuated by the scrape of something heavy being dragged across the floor. The air grew colder, a damp, earthy chill seeping from the unseen depths. I pulled the lantern higher, the flickering light barely penetrating the oppressive gloom. The tunnel ahead sloped downwards, disappearing into a blackness so profound it felt like staring into a void. Fear, cold and sharp, gripped me. My initial scholarly excitement had long since evaporated, replaced by a primal dread that whispered of ancient evils and forgotten horrors. I considered retreating, turning back to the relative safety of the chamber above. But the chanting, hypnotic and insistent, drew me forward. It felt almost expectant. My hand trembling, I began the descent. The tunnel was narrow, the air thick with the smell of dust and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like dried blood. The walls were smooth, almost polished, as if carved from a single piece of obsidian. Runes, similar to those I'd seen on the chamber floor, were etched into the stone, glowing faintly in the lantern light. They were different from any I'd encountered in my research. More angular, more visceral. The scraping sound continued, growing louder with each step. It was accompanied now by a low, rhythmic thumping, like a giant, sluggish heartbeat. The chanting, too, reached a feverish pitch, echoing around me, seeming to close in. I gripped the Templar sword tighter, the cold steel a small comfort in the suffocating darkness. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern. The scale of it was breathtaking, dwarfing the chamber above. The lantern light couldn't reach the far walls, lost in the oppressive shadows. The chanting, here, was almost deafening, resonating with a power that made my head spin. In the center of the cavern, a single, massive brazier burned, casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls. Around the brazier, robed figures moved in a slow, deliberate circle. Their faces were hidden by hoods, but the glimpses I caught of their hands, skeletal and pale, sent a shiver down my spine. They were chanting, their voices merging into a single, terrifying drone. And then I saw it, what they were circling. In the center of their ritualistic dance lay a massive stone altar, chains thick and rusted, hung from the ceiling, anchored to the altar's surface. And bound to those chains, suspended above the flickering flames, was a creature. It was humanoid, but twisted and grotesque, its limbs elongated and contorted at unnatural angles. Its skin was a sickly gray, stretched taut over protruding bones. Its head lolled to one side, revealing a face that was both horrifying and strangely familiar. A single, milky eye stared blankly ahead, reflecting the firelight. The chanting intensified, reaching a crescendo. The robed figures raised their hands towards the creature, their movements synchronized, almost mechanical. The thumping sound, like a monstrous heartbeat, grew louder, faster. The air crackled with an unseen energy. Suddenly, one of the figures stepped forward, a ceremonial dagger glinting in their hand. He approached the creature, the dagger raised. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but witness the horror unfolding before me. But I was frozen, rooted to the spot, my eyes fixed on the scene. As the dagger descended, the creature's head snapped up, its single eye fixed on me, and a low, guttural growl escaped its lips. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated malice. And in that moment, as the dagger pierced the creature's flesh, I recognized the face. It was the face of the Templar knight from the portrait, the one who had discovered the vault. Twisted, corrupted, but undeniably him. The chanting stopped. The robed figures turned towards me, their hooded faces still obscured. The air grew heavy, charged with a malevolent energy. The creature, impaled on the dagger, continued to stare at me, its single eye burning with an unholy light. And then, a voice, deep and resonant, echoed through the cavern, speaking in perfect English. "Welcome," it said, the words dripping with a chilling familiarity. "We have been expecting you." The lantern slipped from my numb fingers, crashing to the stone floor, plunging the cavern into darkness. The last thing I saw, before the shadows consumed me, were the robed figures advancing, their skeletal hands outstretched. I entered the Templar vault under Jerusalem, Part 4. The chanting continued, a low thrumming vibration that seemed to emanate from the very stones around me. I pressed further into the alcove, the cold, rough-hewn rock digging into my back. The flickering light of my torch painted grotesque shadows on the walls, transforming natural imperfections into leering faces and grasping claws. My breath hitched in my throat with every rustle of cloth, every drip of water echoing through the oppressive silence between the chants. I risked another peek. The chamber beyond was larger than I initially thought, a cavernous space that dwarfed the tunnel I traversed. The source of the chanting was now visible, a circle of figures robed in what looked like ancient Templar garb, their faces obscured by deep cowls. They stood around a central dais, upon which rested a large, intricately carved wooden chest. Its surface was covered in arcane symbols that seemed to writhe and shift in the flickering torchlight, making my stomach churn. A wave of nausea washed over me. The air was thick with a cloying, metallic scent, like old blood and something else, something acrid and unnatural. I choked back the urge to vomit, my hand clamped over my mouth. Whatever ritual these figures were performing, it was something ancient and deeply unsettling. They moved in a slow, rhythmic dance around the chest, their chanting growing in intensity. I noticed then that they weren't entirely human. Their movements were too fluid, too jointed, and glimpses beneath their cowls revealed glimpses of pale, almost translucent skin stretched taut over sharp, angular features. Their hands, visible as they raised them in supplication, were skeletal, the fingers elongated and tipped with what looked like polished bone claws. My mind reeled. Were these the guardians of the vault? Some twisted mockery of the Templar knights who had once guarded this place? Or something far older, something that had been here long before the Crusaders arrived, something that the Templars themselves had unwittingly disturbed? The chanting reached a fever pitch. The figures began to sway faster, their movements becoming increasingly frenzied. The symbols on the chest pulsed with an eerie, internal light. I felt a pressure building in the chamber, a palpable sense of dread that made my skin crawl. Suddenly, the chanting stopped. A silence descended, heavier and more oppressive than any I had experienced before. The figures froze, their cowled heads bowed towards the chest. Then, slowly, one by one, they began to raise their heads. I shrank back further into the alcove, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I couldn't see their faces, but I could feel their gaze, cold and piercing, boring into me. They knew I was there. A single figure, taller and more imposing than the others, detached itself from the circle. It moved with an unnatural grace, gliding across the stone floor towards my hiding place. The torchlight glinted off something metallic in its hand. A long, curved dagger, its blade blackened and seemingly stained with something that shimmered faintly, like oil on water. Terror gripped me, icy and paralyzing. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen in place, trapped by the weight of their gaze. The figure stopped just outside the alcove, its shadowed form looming over me. I could hear its breathing, a shallow, rasping sound that seemed to echo the silence of the chamber. Slowly, agonizingly, it extended a hand towards me, its skeletal fingers reaching into the shadows. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. But instead of the touch I expected, I felt a rush of cold air. I opened my eyes. The figure was gone. The chanting had begun again, softer now, almost a whisper. The other figures had returned to their circling of the chest, their movements slow and deliberate once more. It was as if the figure had never left the circle, as if my mind had played a cruel trick on me. But I knew what I had seen. I knew that something had been there, something malevolent and inhuman. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that it would be back. I remained huddled in the alcove, long after the chanting faded and the chamber was plunged into darkness. The silence was broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water, each drop a hammer blow against the fragile remnants of my sanity. I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to find a way out, a way to escape this unholy place. But the thought of venturing back into the darkness, of facing those things again, filled me with a primal terror. Finally, driven by a desperation that outweighed my fear, I fumbled for my torch and stepped out of the alcove. The chamber was empty. The chest remained on the dais, its symbols now inert and lifeless. But the air still hung heavy with that cloying metallic scent, a constant reminder of what I had witnessed. I turned and fled, back towards the tunnel, back towards the unknown. The silence followed me, pregnant with unspoken horrors. And in the depths of that silence, I could have sworn I heard a faint, chilling whisper, a voice that seemed to come from within my own mind. "We know you're here." I entered the Templar vault under Jerusalem, Part 5. The chanting continued, a low, guttural drone that seemed to vibrate the very bedrock beneath me. I pressed further down the passage, the chill intensifying until my breath plumed white in the air. The torch in my trembling hand cast flickering shadows that danced like macabre puppets on the rough-hewn walls. The passage narrowed, forcing me to stoop, the oppressive weight of the earth above seeming to press down on my shoulders, a physical manifestation of the dread that coiled in my gut. Ioroda. Finally, the passage opened into a vast, subterranean chamber. The scale of it was breathtaking, dwarfing even the grandest cathedrals I'd ever seen. Massive pillars, carved with intricate, unsettling designs, soared upwards into the darkness, their tops lost in the gloom. The air was thick, with a smell of damp earth and something else, something acrid, metallic, like the scent of old blood. The chanting was louder here, resonating through the chamber, amplified by the cavernous space. I strained my eyes, trying to pierce the darkness. At the far end of the chamber, I could make out a faint flickering light. As I approached, the source of the light and the chanting became horrifyingly clear. A group of figures robed in dark hooded garments stood in a circle around a blazing fire. The firelight cast their faces in a hellish glow, revealing features gaunt and hollow, eyes burning with an unnatural fervor. Their chanting rose and fell in a rhythmic, hypnotic pattern, their voices blending into a single, terrifying chorus. In the center of the circle lay a stone altar, and upon the altar, my blood ran cold. Strapped to the altar, limbs splayed, was a human figure. The figure was naked, skin pale and glistening in the firelight. Their head was lolling to the side, their eyes closed. I couldn't tell if they were alive or dead. One of the robed figures stepped forward, raising a gleaming dagger above their head. The chanting intensified, reaching a fever pitch. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but witness the horror unfolding before me. But I was frozen, rooted to the spot, a morbid fascination holding me captive. The dagger plunged downwards. A scream, high and piercing, echoed through the chamber, abruptly cutting through the chanting. The robed figures froze, their heads snapping up, their gazes locking onto me. The scream, it hadn't come from the figure on the altar. It had come from me. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Then, slowly, the robed figures began to turn towards me. The firelight glinted off their eyes, and I realized with a sickening lurch that they weren't human. Their eyes were too large, too black, too empty. They began to advance, their movements slow, deliberate, predatory. The chanting started again, this time directed at me, a low, menacing growl that seemed to burrow into my skull. Terror, raw and primal, flooded through me. I turned and ran, stumbling back down the passage, the chanting echoing in my ears, spurring me on. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The image of the figure on the altar, the gleam of the dagger, the empty eyes of the robed figures, it was burned into my mind. I ran blindly, the torch casting wild, erratic shadows that danced like demons on the walls. The passage seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning, a labyrinth designed to trap and confuse. My lungs burned, my legs screamed in protest, but I didn't dare slow down. I could feel them behind me, their presence, a palpable weight in the air, their chanting growing closer, louder. Finally, I stumbled upon the rope I had used to descend. Without hesitation, I scrambled up, hand over hand, the rough rope tearing at my skin. I didn't stop until I reached the opening, hauling myself out onto the cold stone floor of the hidden chamber. I collapsed, gasping for breath, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I lay there for a long time, the silence of the chamber, a stark contrast to the chanting that still echoed in my mind. Slowly, the terror began to recede, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion and a profound sense of unease. I had seen something I wasn't meant to see. I had stumbled upon a secret, ancient and terrifying. And I knew with a chilling certainty that they wouldn't let me forget it. They would find me. I looked down at the rope, still dangling into the darkness below. I considered cutting it, severing the connection to the horrors below, but I knew it wouldn't matter. The connection wasn't in the rope, it was in me. They had marked me. And they were coming. I entered the Templar vault, under Jerusalem, Part 6. The chanting grew louder, vibrating through the stone floor and up into my bones, resonating in my skull like a morbid lullaby. It was a language I didn't recognize, guttural and rhythmic, laced with an unsettling resonance that suggested something far older than Latin, older perhaps than human language itself. I pressed on, the flickering lantern light painting grotesque shadows on the slick, uneven walls, the air growing thick with a metallic tang that made my stomach churn. The tunnel finally opened into a vast cavern, the scale of which was utterly breathtaking and utterly terrifying. My lantern's feeble light couldn't reach the ceiling, lost in the inky blackness above. Giant stalactites dripped like the teeth of some monstrous beast, their shadows transforming them into grotesque, writhing shapes. The chanting echoed through the cavern, amplified by the vast space, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. In the center of the cavern, a flickering fire cast an eerie orange glow. Around it, figures cloaked in black robes moved rhythmically, their faces obscured by deep hoods. They moved with a strange, synchronized grace, their movements almost hypnotic. As I watched, mesmerized and horrified, they began to raise their arms, their robes falling back to reveal not flesh, but something else. Something smooth and obsidian like polished stone. My breath hitched in my throat. These weren't humans. They were things, shaped like humans, but fundamentally different. Their movements, while graceful, lacked the subtle nuances of human motion. They were too precise, too fluid, like puppets controlled by invisible strings. The chanting reached a crescendo, and the figures began to sway in unison, their movements growing faster and more frenetic. A wave of nausea washed over me, the metallic smell intensifying until it was almost unbearable. I had to get out of there. This was beyond anything I could have imagined. This wasn't a Templar vault. It was something far more ancient, far more sinister. I started to back away, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. As I did, I noticed something on the floor, glinting in the firelight. It was a book, bound in dark leather, its pages filled with strange symbols and diagrams. I felt drawn to it, compelled by a morbid curiosity. Against my better judgment, I took a tentative step towards it. Then, one of the figures stopped moving. It turned, slowly, deliberately, its unseen face directed towards me. The chanting faltered, a ripple of unease spreading through the assembled figures. I froze, every muscle in my body screaming at me to run. The figure took a step towards me, then another. It moved with an unnatural grace, its obsidian limbs gliding across the cavern floor. The other figures resumed their chanting, their voices laced with a new, urgent quality. The lone figure continued to approach, its movements growing faster, more predatory. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I had been seen, that I was no longer an unseen observer. I turned and ran. The book, the chanting, the obsidian figures, all were forgotten in the face of pure, unadulterated terror. I stumbled through the darkness, my lantern swinging wildly, casting distorted shadows that danced like demons on the cavern walls. The chanting pursued me, echoing through the tunnels, growing louder with each frantic step. I didn't know where I was going. All I knew was that I had to escape. I had to get out of that unholy place. I scrambled through narrow passages, my hands scraping against the rough stone, the metallic tang of the air clinging to my throat. I could hear the figure behind me, its footsteps echoing ominously in the darkness. It wasn't running, but it was gaining on me. Its steady, relentless pursuit was more terrifying than any outright chase. I stumbled into another chamber, smaller than the cavern, but equally disturbing. The walls were covered in carvings, intricate and unsettling. They depicted strange, humanoid figures engaged in grotesque rituals, their bodies contorted into impossible positions. The air in the chamber was heavy, oppressive, filled with the same metallic tang, but thicker, almost suffocating. In the center of the chamber, a single brazier burned, casting a sickly green light, and in the light of that brazier, I saw it. A figure, cloaked in black, its face hidden by a deep hood. It stood perfectly still, its arms raised in a gesture of supplication. But it wasn't one of the obsidian figures. This one was human, or at least it had once been human. The skin was stretched taut over its bones, desiccated and gray. Its eyes were gone, leaving empty sockets that stared out into the void. Its lips were drawn back in a rictus grin, revealing yellowed teeth. It was a mummified husk, a grotesque parody of life. And as I stared at it, horrified, I realized something even more terrifying. It was wearing the same cross that Thomas had worn, the Templar cross. The chanting grew closer, the footsteps behind me louder. I knew I couldn't stay there. I turned to flee, but the exit was blocked. The obsidian figure stood there, its smooth, black form silhouetted against the flickering green light. It raised its arm, and I saw something glint in its hand. A blade. Not a sword, but something smaller, more sinister. A dagger, fashioned from the same obsidian material as its body. And on the hilt of that dagger, I saw a familiar symbol. The Templar cross. I entered the Templar vault under Jerusalem, Part 7. The echoing clang of the gates slamming shut reverberated through me, a physical manifestation of my utter isolation. The torchlight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn stone, making the already claustrophobic space feel even smaller. I spun around, desperately searching for some other way out, a hidden passage, anything, but the smooth walls offered no solace. The gate, a solid slab of blackened iron, remained impassive, a final punctuation mark on my foolishness. Panic tightened its icy grip around my chest. The air, already stale and heavy with the scent of dust and something ancient, indefinable, now seemed to thicken, making each breath a struggle. I pressed my hand against the cold stone, seeking a grounding presence in the suffocating darkness. The chill seeped into my bones, a stark reminder of the depth and age of this place. Remembering Elias's warning about conserving the torch, I forced myself to slow my breathing. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water from some unseen source. Each droplet seemed to amplify the emptiness, the weight of the earth above pressing down on me. Taking a shaky breath, I turned back to the altar. The lambskin parchment still lay there, bathed in the flickering orange light. The symbols, indecipherable yet somehow disturbingly familiar, seemed to writhe in the periphery of my vision. I forced myself to focus, trying to recall Elias's words about the ritual. He had spoken of a cleansing, a preparation for something he hadn't explained. With trembling hands, I unfurled the scroll further. The script, dense and angular, covered both sides. As I scanned the lines, a growing unease crawled beneath my skin. The language, although unknown, felt strangely resonant, as though some forgotten part of me understood its sinister pronouncements. Scattered throughout the text were intricate diagrams, geometric shapes interwoven with grotesque, humanoid figures. One image in particular caught my attention. It depicted a figure cloaked and hooded, holding a dagger aloft, poised above a prostrate form. The posture, the positioning of the dagger, it was unnervingly similar to the carvings I had seen on the walls of the outer chamber. A cold draft snaked through the chamber, extinguishing the torch. I gasped, plunging into absolute darkness. Blind panic threatened to overwhelm me. I fumbled for the flint and steel, my fingers scrabbling against the rough stone. The silence pressed in, heavy and suffocating. I could hear the frantic beating of my own heart, a drumbeat against the oppressive quiet. Finally, my trembling fingers connected with the flint and steel. Sparks flew, and after what felt like an eternity, the wick caught. The small flame offered little comfort in the vast darkness, but it was enough to see. As I held the torch aloft, my gaze fell back on the altar. And then I saw it. A dark stain had spread across the parchment, obscuring the diagrams and text. It was a viscous, oily substance, shimmering faintly in the torchlight. It pulsed with a slow, rhythmic movement, like a beating heart. My stomach lurched. The smell, it was the same cloying, metallic scent that had permeated the outer chamber, but now it was overpowering. A low growl rumbled through the chamber, emanating from the darkness beyond the altar. My blood ran cold. I gripped the torch tighter, my knuckles white. The growl intensified, closer now, accompanied by a slithering sound, like something dragging itself across stone. Slowly, cautiously, I moved the torch towards the source of the sound. The shadows danced and writhed, playing tricks on my eyes. I strained to see, my breath caught in my throat. Then, it emerged from the darkness. A creature unlike anything I had ever seen or imagined. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, but twisted and distorted. Its limbs elongated and contorted at unnatural angles. Its skin was a sickly, grayish-white, stretched taut over protruding bones. Its head was elongated, almost serpentine, with eyes that glowed with a malevolent red light. Its mouth, a gaping maw, filled with needle-sharp teeth, dripped with the same dark, oily substance that stained the parchment. The creature let out a guttural hiss, its eyes fixed on me. It took a step forward, its movements unnervingly fluid, almost boneless. The stench emanating from it was overwhelming, a nauseating combination of decay and something else, something ancient and unholy. Terror seized me. I stumbled back, dropping the torch. The flames sputtered and died, plunging the chamber back into darkness. The growl, now closer than ever, echoed around me. I felt a hot breath on my face, the stench filling my nostrils. A clawed hand reached out, brushing against my cheek. I screamed. I entered the Templar vault under Jerusalem, Part 8. The chanting grew louder, a guttural drone vibrating through the very stone beneath my feet. My torch flickered, threatening to extinguish itself against the unnatural chill that permeated the air. The passage, once merely claustrophobic, now felt actively hostile, pressing in on me, squeezing the breath from my lungs. I fumbled for the lighter in my pack, my fingers numb and clumsy. The thought of being plunged into absolute darkness in this place was more terrifying than whatever lay ahead. Finally, the lighter sparked, and the torch reignited, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and shift like living things. The passage opened into a vast cavern, the scale of which dwarfed even the grandest cathedral I had ever seen. Gigantic pillars, carved with intricate and disturbing reliefs, scenes of sacrifice, of strange rituals, of beings that defied description, rose up into the darkness, their tops lost in the gloom. And in the center of the cavern, bathed in an unnatural, pulsating light, was the source of the chanting. A group of figures, cloaked and hooded, stood in a circle around a raised platform. The light, an eerie, sickly green, emanated from the platform itself. As my eyes adjusted, I saw that the platform was not made of stone, but of something organic. It pulsed and throbbed with a slow, sickening rhythm, like a giant heart. The chanting intensified, rising to a fever pitch. The figures on the platform began to move, their movements slow and ritualistic. They raised their arms, their cloaks falling back to reveal robes of crimson silk, embroidered with symbols I recognized from the Templar texts I had studied. Symbols of power, of forbidden knowledge, of something else, something I couldn't quite place. Driven by a morbid curiosity, I crept closer, keeping to the shadows cast by the enormous pillars. The air grew thick and heavy, the scent of incense mingling with something else, something metallic and coppery, the smell of blood. The chanting reached a crescendo, and the figures on the platform prostrated themselves before the pulsing mass in the center. Then, one of the figures rose and approached the thing. He raised a dagger, its blade gleaming in the unnatural light, and plunged it into the pulsing mass. A scream, inhuman and filled with unimaginable agony, echoed through the cavern. The pulsing light intensified, bathing the entire chamber in a blinding green glow. I shielded my eyes, but I could still see the figures on the platform. They were no longer human. Their skin shimmered with the same sickly green light, their eyes glowed with an unholy fire, and their features were shifting and changing, becoming something monstrous, something alien. Terror, pure and primal, seized me. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything but witness the horror unfolding before me. But my legs felt like lead, my voice caught in my throat. I was trapped, a spectator to some ancient, unholy ritual. The creatures, for they were no longer human, began to move towards the edge of the platform. Their movements were no longer slow and ritualistic, but quick and predatory. Their eyes, burning with an insatiable hunger, scanned the darkness, searching for me. I knew I had to escape. I turned and fled, stumbling through the darkness, the chanting of the creatures echoing in my ears, their footsteps growing closer. I ran blindly, not knowing where I was going, driven only by the primal urge to survive. The passage seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning, leading me deeper and deeper into the bowels of the earth. The chanting grew louder, closer. I could feel their presence behind me, their hot, fetid breath on my neck. I stumbled, falling heavily to the ground. My torch rolled away, extinguishing itself, plunging me into absolute darkness. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest, the chanting of the creatures filling my ears. Then I felt a hand, cold and clammy, close around my ankle. A guttural growl echoed in the darkness, and I knew that my time was running out. I kicked out, desperately trying to free myself, but the grip tightened. I screamed, a wordless cry of terror, as I was dragged into the darkness. I could feel the creatures closing in, their hot, rancid breath on my face. Their hands, cold and clammy, reached out, touching, grasping, pulling. I struggled, fought, but it was no use. I was outnumbered, overpowered. Then, just as I felt myself losing consciousness, I heard a sound. A sound that was not the chanting of the creatures, but something else. A deep, resonant hum, vibrating through the very stone beneath me. The hum grew louder, more intense, and the grip on my ankle loosened. The creatures recoiled, their guttural growls turning into shrieks of pain. The darkness began to recede, replaced by a soft, warm light. I blinked, trying to focus, and saw a figure standing before me. A figure bathed in golden light, its features obscured by the brilliance. The figure raised its hand, and the humming intensified. The creatures shrieked again, a sound of pure agony, and then they were gone, vanished into the darkness. The figure turned to me, and I saw nothing. The light was too bright, blinding. But I felt a sense of peace, of calm, that I had not felt since entering this cursed place. The figure spoke, its voice a deep, resonant hum, echoing the sound that had driven away the creatures. "You are not meant to be here," it said. "But you have seen too much. You must be shown the truth." I entered the Templar vault under Jerusalem, Part 9. The chanting intensified. A low thrum that vibrated through the stone floor and up into my bones. The flickering light from Elias's torch painted the grotesque carvings on the walls in a macabre dance. The spiral staircase seemed to stretch endlessly downwards, the air growing colder and damper with each step. The smell of wet earth and something indefinably wrong clung to the air. "Elias," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the ominous chanting. "I don't like this. We should go back." Elias didn't respond. His eyes, wide and unseeing, were fixed on the depths below. He continued his descent, a strange, almost robotic gait, replacing his usual confident stride. The chanting, now louder, seemed to pull him down, an invisible force compelling him forward. I had no choice but to follow. The spiral staircase finally ended in a vast, circular chamber. Torches, affixed to the walls in sconces shaped like skeletal hands, illuminated the space with an unsettling, flickering glow. The chanting resonated from the very stones of this chamber, a palpable wave of sound that pressed against my eardrums. In the center of the chamber stood a raised dais. Upon it lay a massive, intricately carved sarcophagus of black obsidian. Its surface was covered in glyphs, similar to the ones I'd seen on the amulet, pulsating with an internal, sickly green light. The chanting seemed to emanate from this very sarcophagus, the source of this unholy symphony. Elias, still in his trance-like state, moved towards the sarcophagus. He circled it slowly, his hands outstretched as if reaching for something unseen. The glyphs on the obsidian pulsed brighter, the green light intensifying, casting eerie shadows that danced and writhed across the chamber walls. "Elias, snap out of it!" I yelled, my voice echoing in the vast space. He didn't react. I rushed towards him, grabbing his arm. His skin felt icy cold, his muscles rigid. As I touched him, the chanting abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the sound had been, a heavy, oppressive blanket that smothered all other noise. Elias slowly turned his head to face me. His eyes, no longer blank, were filled with an unsettling intensity, burning with an alien fire. He smiled, a slow, chilling smile that sent shivers down my spine. "They've been waiting for you," he whispered, his voice a raspy, guttural sound that I barely recognized. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through me. I pulled my hand away from him as if burned. He took another step towards the sarcophagus, his gaze fixed on it with an almost reverential awe. "Who has been waiting?" I stammered, backing away slowly. He reached the dais and placed his hand on the obsidian lid of the sarcophagus. The glyphs flared with blinding light, and a low, rumbling sound filled the chamber. The ground beneath my feet trembled. "The ones who slumber within," Elias said, his voice echoing around the chamber. "The ones who will awaken." He pushed on the lid of the sarcophagus. It slid open with a grating sound that scraped against my nerves, revealing a darkness so profound it seemed to swallow the light. The air grew colder, the smell of decay intensified, and the faintest whisper of something ancient and malevolent reached my ears. I wanted to run. To flee back up the spiral staircase, away from this unholy place. But something held me rooted to the spot, a morbid fascination mingled with a primal terror. Elias leaned over the sarcophagus, peering into the darkness within. Then he began to chant, a different chant this time, high-pitched and unsettling, like the cries of tortured souls. The glyphs on the walls pulsed in time with his chant, bathing the chamber in a sickly green light. Suddenly, a hand reached out from the darkness within the sarcophagus. It was skeletal and withered, the skin stretched taut over the bones, the fingernails long and sharp like claws. It grasped the edge of the sarcophagus, pulling itself up, revealing more of the creature within. It was humanoid in form, but emaciated and grotesque, its skin a sickly gray-green. Its eyes glowed with the same unholy green light as the glyphs, burning with an ancient malice. As it climbed out of the sarcophagus, another hand reached out, followed by another and another. Soon the chamber was filled with these grotesque figures, their eyes fixed on me, their skeletal hands reaching out. Elias stepped aside, his chilling smile widening. "They are hungry," he whispered, "and you are their feast." I screamed, a primal scream of terror that echoed through the ancient Templar vault. The creatures advanced, their movements jerky and unnatural, their glowing eyes burning into my soul. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I was about to die. I entered the Templar vault under Jerusalem. Part 10. The chanting intensified, resonating not just through the vault, but within my very bones. It was a language I didn't understand, yet it felt perversely familiar, like a half-remembered nightmare. The pulsating light from the artifact cast grotesque, dancing shadows on the chamber walls, transforming the Templar symbols into leering, mocking faces. My hand, still hovering over the inscription, trembled uncontrollably. I snatched it back as though burned. Elias remained prostrate, oblivious to my growing panic. Thomas, however, was staring at the artifact with a mixture of awe and terror. His breathing was shallow, his face a mask of stark white against the flickering crimson light. He looked as though he was caught between wanting to run and wanting to worship. "Thomas," I whispered, my voice raspy with fear, "we need to leave, now." He didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the pulsating heart, his lips moving silently. He was repeating the chant. A chilling wave washed over me. It wasn't just the cold of the vault. It was something deeper, a primal fear that sunk its claws into my soul. I looked at the inscription again, at the archaic symbols that seemed to writhe under the unnatural light. I had a sudden, terrifying realization. This wasn't a vault meant to protect something. It was a prison, and we had just opened the cell door. "Thomas," I grabbed his shoulder, shaking him roughly. "Snap out of it." He blinked, his eyes focusing on me for a fleeting moment before drifting back to the artifact. He uttered a word, low and guttural, a word that definitely wasn't Latin or any language I'd ever encountered. Fear turned to ice in my veins. Whatever this was, it was taking hold of him. I had to get him out. I pulled him with all my strength, but he was surprisingly resistant. His normally gentle eyes now burned with an unsettling intensity. Suddenly, the ground beneath us vibrated. The chanting swelled, becoming a deafening roar that echoed in my skull. Dust and debris rained down from the vaulted ceiling. Cracks, like spiderwebs, spread across the floor, widening with alarming speed. The entire chamber seemed to be groaning under immense pressure. Panic surged through me. I glanced at Elias, still prone on the ground. I couldn't just leave him. With a desperate heave, I managed to pull Thomas away from the pulsating heart, dragging him towards Elias. He struggled weakly, whimpering like a wounded animal. As I reached Elias, the floor beneath the artifact collapsed, creating a gaping chasm that plunged into impenetrable darkness. The pulsating heart vanished into the abyss, its crimson light extinguished in an instant. The chanting stopped abruptly, replaced by an echoing silence that was even more terrifying. The vibrations ceased, the dust settled. The only sound was the ragged breathing of Thomas and myself. I knelt beside Elias, checking for a pulse. He was alive, but unconscious. The chamber was now dimly lit by the flickering flames of our torches, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on my eyes. I felt a creeping dread, a sense of being watched. I turned slowly, scanning the chamber, searching for something. I didn't know what. Then I saw it. Or rather, Saxon Mide. In the shadows, near the newly formed chasm, figures were coalescing. They weren't solid, more like shimmering apparitions, taking shape from the lingering darkness. They were humanoid in form, but tall and gaunt, with elongated limbs and what appeared to be horns. My breath hitched in my throat. I clutched Thomas's arm, pulling him closer. He seemed to have regained some semblance of awareness, his eyes wide with terror as he stared at the shadowy figures. They were moving towards us, slowly, deliberately, their forms solidifying with every step. Their movements were unnatural, jerky, like puppets on fraying strings. I could feel a cold, oppressive presence emanating from them, draining the very warmth from the air. I wanted to scream, to run, but my limbs felt like lead. I was paralyzed with fear, trapped in a waking nightmare. One of the figures, taller than the others, stepped forward. Its features slowly resolved in the flickering torchlight, revealing a face that was both horrifying and strangely sorrowful. Its eyes, glowing with an eerie internal light, fixed on me, and a voice, cold as the grave, echoed in my mind. "You have awakened us," it said, the words resonating deep within my soul, "and now you will pay the price." The other figures moved closer, their shadowy forms closing in around us. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that we were trapped. We had opened the gate to hell, and now the demons had come to claim their due. I entered the Templar vault under Jerusalem, part 11 of 25. The chanting grew louder, resonating through my very bones, a vibration more than a sound. The glyphs on the walls pulsed with a sickening organic light, casting grotesque shadows that danced and writhed like tortured souls. I pressed myself against the cold stone, the dampness seeping into my clothes, a chilling premonition clinging to me like a shroud. The tunnel ahead was bathed in this pulsating, unholy luminescence, the air thick with the smell of ozone and something else, something ancient and metallic, like the scent of dried blood. I had to keep moving. Turning back was unthinkable. The whispers from the chamber behind me, the scratching at the stone, promised a fate far worse than whatever lurked ahead. I pulled the flickering lantern closer, the small flame casting a pathetically weak circle of light, and forced myself forward, one hesitant step at a time. The tunnel sloped downwards, the air growing colder and heavier with each meter. The chanting intensified, morphing into a discernible language, though one I couldn't understand. It sounded guttural and primeval, each syllable imbued with an unsettling power that seemed to drain the warmth from my body. The tunnel opened into a vast cavern, the sheer scale of it breathtaking and terrifying. Giant stalactites hung from the ceiling like the teeth of some monstrous subterranean beast, their tips dripping a viscous, black fluid that hissed as it hit the floor. The floor itself was a mosaic of smooth, polished stones, arranged in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and writhe under the flickering light of my lantern. In the center of the cavern, a raised platform pulsed with the same unnatural light as the glyphs in the tunnel. On the platform lay a massive, sarcophagus-like structure, carved from a single piece of obsidian, its surface covered in the same pulsating glyphs. The chanting reached its crescendo, emanating from the sarcophagus itself, resonating with a power that made my teeth ache. Around the platform, figures stood in silent vigil, dozens of them cloaked and hooded, their faces obscured by shadows. They were motionless, statuesque, their presence adding another layer of unsettling stillness to the already oppressive atmosphere. They were not like the desiccated corpses I had seen earlier. These figures felt alive. My heart hammered in my chest. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I was witnessing something ancient, something unholy. This wasn't just a Templar vault. It was something far older, far more sinister. Slowly, cautiously, I began to descend the sloping tunnel towards the cavern floor. Each step was an act of defiance against the fear that threatened to paralyze me. The chanting intensified, and I began to feel a strange pressure building in my head, a dizzying sensation of being pulled, drawn towards the pulsating sarcophagus. As I reached the cavern floor, one of the cloaked figures turned its head, the shadows momentarily shifting to reveal a glimpse of something beneath the hood. It wasn't a face, it was a skull, its empty sockets glowing with the same unnatural light as the glyphs. I stumbled back, a choked gasp escaping my lips. The skull turned further, its empty gaze fixed on me, and a low, guttural growl emanated from beneath the hood. The other figures began to stir, their heads turning slowly, their movements stiff and unnatural. The growling intensified, becoming a chorus of guttural sounds that echoed through the vast cavern. I was surrounded, trapped in this subterranean nightmare, with no escape in sight. The chanting stopped. An oppressive silence descended upon the cavern, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of the black fluid from the stalactites. Then, the lid of the obsidian sarcophagus began to slide open, grating against the stone with a sound that sent shivers down my spine. The light from within the sarcophagus intensified, blindingly bright, and I squeezed my eyes shut, raising my arm to shield my face. I heard a wet, sucking sound, followed by a low, rasping breath that seemed to fill the entire cavern. When I dared to open my eyes, the light had dimmed, and the sarcophagus lay open. Inside, nestled amongst what looked like pulsating, fleshy tendrils, lay a figure. It was humanoid, but wrong. Its skin was pale and translucent, stretched taut over its skeletal frame. Its eyes were wide and black, devoid of pupils, radiating an ancient, malevolent intelligence. Its limbs were long and spindly, ending in clawed hands that twitched and spasmed. The figure slowly raised its head, its black gaze fixing on me, and a thin, reedy voice echoed through the cavern, speaking in the same guttural language as the chanting. I couldn't understand the words, but I understood the intent. It was a greeting, a welcome, and a promise of unimaginable horror. I entered the Templar vault under Jerusalem, Part 12. The chanting grew louder, vibrating through the stone floor and up into my very bones. It felt less like a hymn, and more like a guttural incantation, something dredged from a depth far older than the Crusades. The air itself seemed to thicken, becoming heavy with a palpable sense of dread. Elias remained silent, his face pale and drawn, his grip on the Templar sword white-knuckled. He looked like a man staring into the abyss and seeing something unspeakable reflected back. We pressed onward, the flickering lantern light our only guide. The corridor widened into a vast cavern, the sheer scale of it dwarfing even the grand chamber we had first entered. The ceiling was lost in the gloom, the lantern's beam unable to penetrate the oppressive darkness. Giant, grotesque statues lined the walls, their features eroded and obscured by time and something else, something that felt like deliberate defacement. They seemed to writhe in the shadows, their forms shifting and distorting at the periphery of my vision. In the center of the cavern was a raised platform, circular and perfectly smooth, like a giant altar. A single shaft of light pierced the darkness from a hole in the ceiling, illuminating the platform in an eerie, almost holy glow. And on that platform, something moved. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the oppressive silence. As we drew closer, the chanting intensified, taking on a rhythmic, almost hypnotic quality. The thing on the platform began to take shape. It was humanoid, draped in dark robes that seemed to absorb the light, making it difficult to discern its true form. It moved slowly, deliberately, performing some kind of ritualistic dance. "What? What is that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible above the chanting. Elias didn't answer. He simply stood there, transfixed, the Templar sword trembling in his hand. We crept closer, drawn in by a morbid curiosity that overrode our primal fear. The closer we got, the more unsettling the details became. The figure's robes were not simply dark, they seemed to writhe and shift like a living thing. and beneath the hood I could glimpse something pale and gaunt, something inhuman. As the figure reached the climax of its dance, it raised its arms towards the light shaft. The chanting reached a fever pitch, echoing and reverberating through the cavern, and then the figure spoke. It wasn't a language I recognized, not Latin, not Hebrew, not anything I'd ever heard before. It was a series of guttural clicks and hisses, interspersed with deep, resonant tones that seemed to vibrate directly in my skull. The sound sent a shiver down my spine, a cold dread that seeped into my very core. Elias finally stirred, his face contorted in a mask of terror. "The Guardian," he whispered, his voice hoarse, "the keeper of the seal." "Seal?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What seal?" He didn't answer. He was staring at the platform, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else. Something that looked almost like reverence. The figure on the platform lowered its arms, and the chanting subsided. It turned slowly, its hooded head facing us. The shadows seemed to deepen around it, obscuring its features, and then it spoke again. This time, the sound was different. It was a whisper, a rasping, chilling whisper that seemed to penetrate the very fabric of reality. And this time, I understood. It wasn't speaking a language, it was speaking directly into my mind. It was showing me images, visions of unimaginable horror. I saw oceans of blood, mountains of skulls, a world consumed by darkness and despair. I saw the figure itself, its true form revealed in all its terrifying glory. It was not human, not entirely. It was something ancient. Something monstrous, something that had existed long before humanity and would likely exist long after. The pressure in my skull intensified, the visions growing more vivid, more horrifying. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to escape the onslaught of terror that was flooding my mind. But I couldn't. I was paralyzed, trapped in the grip of the Guardian's psychic assault. Beside me, Elias dropped to his knees, his face buried in his hands. He was sobbing, his body racked with convulsions. He was muttering something, a prayer, a plea, a curse. I couldn't tell. The pressure in my skull reached a crescendo, and I felt a sharp, searing pain behind my eyes. The world began to spin, the cavern walls blurring and distorting. I felt like I was falling, tumbling into an endless abyss of darkness and madness. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The visions vanished. The pressure subsided. The chanting faded away. The cavern was silent once more. The only sound, the ragged breathing of Elias and my own pounding heart. I looked up at the platform. The Guardian was gone. The only evidence of its presence was the lingering sense of dread that hung heavy in the air, and the horrifying images that were now seared into my mind. I turned to Elias, who was still kneeling on the ground, his body trembling. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with terror. "The seal," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It has been broken." I entered the Templar vault under Jerusalem, Part 13. The whispering intensified, pressing against my sanity like a physical force. It no longer resembled Latin or any language I'd ever encountered. It was guttural, chthonic, woven from the very fabric of the earth's groaning. I pressed my hands against my ears, but the sound seemed to bypass them, resonating directly within my skull. The flickering light from my torch danced across the obscene bas-reliefs carved into the walls, giving them a horrifying semblance of life. They writhed and shifted in my periphery, their grotesque forms contorting into ever more blasphemous postures. I stumbled back, tripping over a loose stone. My hand landed in something wet and sticky. I recoiled in disgust, pulling my hand back to see it coated in a dark, viscous substance that reeked of decay. It wasn't just damp, it was actively pulsating, as if alive. I frantically wiped it on my tunic, the texture clinging to the fabric like a second skin. The stench, however, refused to leave, clinging to me like a shroud. Terror choked the air from my lungs. The whispering, the pulsating fluid, the shifting carvings. It was all too much. I had to get out. I had to escape this subterranean nightmare before it claimed me completely. Turning, I desperately retraced my steps, the torchlight casting grotesque shadows that danced like demons before me. The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly, the exit a distant, unattainable dream. The whispering escalated, becoming a cacophony of voices, each vying for dominance. I felt a chilling presence behind me, as if something large and malevolent was stalking my every move. I didn't dare look back. I ran. The tunnel twisted and turned, a labyrinth designed to trap and confuse. The air grew thick and heavy, each breath a struggle. The pulsating darkness on my tunic seemed to spread, its icy touch creeping up my arm. I could feel the life draining from me, replaced by a numbing cold that seeped into my bones. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a vast circular chamber. The whispering ceased abruptly, replaced by a silence so profound it was deafening. In the center of the chamber, bathed in an unnatural phosphorescent glow, was a massive stone altar. Upon it lay a single object, a book bound in human skin. The skin was stretched taut over the thick wooden boards, the veins and pores still visible in sickening detail. The edges were frayed and ragged, as if gnawed upon by unseen teeth. I knew, instinctively, that this was the source of the whispers, the heart of the vault's unholy power. As I approached, drawn by a morbid fascination I couldn't resist, the phosphorescent glow intensified, casting grotesque shadows that stretched across the chamber's walls. The carvings here were different, more intricate, depicting scenes of unimaginable depravity. Creatures with the heads of beasts and the bodies of men engaged in rituals that defied description, their forms writhing in an obscene parody of life. I reached out a trembling hand towards the book, the skin cool and smooth beneath my fingertips. The moment I touched it, a jolt of pure energy surged through my body, throwing me backwards onto the cold stone floor. The chamber erupted in a blinding white light, and the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than ever. When the light subsided, I saw them. Figures, cloaked in shadows, emerged from the darkness surrounding the altar. They were tall and gaunt, their faces hidden beneath deep cowls. They moved with an unnatural grace, their movements fluid and unsettling. One of the figures stepped forward, its shadowed face turning towards me. I could feel its gaze burning into me, stripping away my layers of defense. It raised a skeletal hand, and the whispers coalesced into a single, chilling voice. "You have found what you sought," the voice echoed through the chamber, resonating with ancient power. "Now you will pay the price." The figures began to close in, their movements slow and deliberate, like predators stalking their prey. I scrambled back, desperate to escape, but the chamber walls seemed to shift and change, blocking my path. The figures were upon me, their cold hands reaching, their shadowed faces inches from mine. I screamed, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence of the vault. The book, bathed in its unholy glow, seemed to pulsate with a malevolent life of its own, a silent witness to my impending doom. The figures closed in, their touch like ice, their whispers a prelude to an eternity of unimaginable horror. And in that moment, I understood. I hadn't found the Templar's secrets. They had found me. I entered the Templar Vault under Jerusalem, Part 14. The chanting grew louder, resonating not just through the air, but through the very stone beneath my feet. It pulsed like a diseased heart, rhythmic and inescapable. I stumbled back from the altar, the heat radiating from it now intense enough to scorch my skin. The ruby pulsed in time with the chant, bathing the chamber in an unsettling crimson glow. Fear gnawed at me, a primal terror I hadn't felt since the initial descent into this cursed place. The symbols on the walls seemed to writhe and shift as the chanting intensified, the figures morphing into grotesque parodies of human and animal forms. My torch sputtered, threatening to succumb to the unnatural atmosphere, leaving me in complete darkness. Driven by a desperate need to escape the oppressive aura of the altar, I turned and began to retrace my steps. The tunnel, however, was no longer as I remembered it. The smooth, carved walls now pulsed with the same crimson light, the intricate carvings now seeming less like religious iconography, and more like the fevered scrawls of a madman. The further I walked, the more distorted the tunnel became. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting around me, making the passage feel claustrophobic. The air grew thick and cloying, filled with the stench of something ancient and decaying. It tasted of dust and blood, coating my tongue and making me gag. The chanting continued, growing louder with each step I took. It no longer sounded like human voices, but a chorus of something other, something inhuman. A low, guttural growl began to weave its way through the chant, a sound that vibrated deep within my bones. I quickened my pace, driven by a rising panic. I had to get out, had to escape this nightmare. But the tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly before me, twisting and turning in ways that defied logic. I felt like a rat trapped in a maze, desperately searching for an exit that didn't exist. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a large cavern. The chanting stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence so profound it was almost painful. My torch flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across the cavern walls. I held my breath, straining to see through the gloom. Slowly, my eyes adjusted to the darkness. The cavern was circular, the walls adorned with the same unsettling carvings as the tunnel. In the center of the cavern, a single pillar of stone rose from the floor to the unseen ceiling. Chains hung from the pillar, their ends disappearing into the darkness above. And then I saw it. At the base of the pillar, a figure lay chained and bound. The chains were thick and rusted, digging deep into the figure's flesh. The figure was humanoid, but grotesquely distorted. Its limbs were elongated and twisted at unnatural angles, its head lolling to one side, revealing a face that was both human and something else entirely. Its skin was pale and stretched taut over its bones, revealing a network of pulsing veins. Its eyes were open, staring blankly ahead, reflecting the faint light of my torch. They were not human eyes. They were black, bottomless pits, filled with an ancient, unknowable malevolence. A wave of nausea washed over me. The creature, for that's what it undoubtedly was, emanated an aura of pure evil, a palpable sense of corruption that seemed to seep into my very soul. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to escape its presence, but I was frozen, rooted to the spot by a terror so profound it paralyzed me. As I stared at the creature, a low growl rumbled from its throat. The growl grew in intensity, morphing into a guttural chuckle that echoed through the cavern. The chains that bound it rattled, the sound scraping against my nerves like fingernails on a chalkboard. The creature's head slowly turned, its black eyes fixing on me. A smile stretched across its face, a horrific, unnatural grimace that revealed rows of needle-sharp teeth. "Welcome," it rasped, its voice a dry, rustling whisper that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. "We have been expecting you." My heart pounded in my chest. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this creature was the source of the chanting, the source of the evil that permeated this place. And I knew, with equal certainty, that I was trapped. The creature's smile widened, revealing more of its terrifying teeth. "The ritual is almost complete," it hissed. "Soon, the gate will open, and then we will be free." The ruby in the altar room pulsed brighter, bathing the tunnel in a crimson glow. The chanting resumed, louder and more fervent than before. And I knew, with a sickening dread, that whatever gate the creature spoke of, it was something that should never be opened. I entered the Templar vault under Jerusalem. Part 15 of 25. The chanting intensified, vibrating through the stone floor and into my bones. My flickering lantern cast long, dancing shadows against the cavern walls, making the already grotesque carvings seem to writhe and shift. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of something ancient and indescribably foul, like decaying parchment and dried blood. I clutched the Templar cross, its cold metal, a small comfort in the growing darkness of the vault. Slowly, hesitantly, I continued down the spiraling staircase. Each step was a descent into a deeper, more profound sense of unease. The chanting seemed to wrap around me, a suffocating blanket of sound. It wasn't simply chanting anymore, it felt like an invocation, a summoning. The very air crackled with unseen energy. I reached the bottom of the stairs and found myself in a vast, circular chamber. The ceiling was lost in shadow, too high for my lantern light to penetrate. In the center of the chamber stood a massive altar, carved from a single block of black obsidian. Its surface was slick, reflecting the flickering light, like stagnant water. Around the altar, arranged in a perfect circle, were 12 hooded figures. Their robes were the color of dried blood, and they chanted in unison, their voices deep and resonant, echoing off the unseen ceiling. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through me. I wanted to turn and flee, to race back up the stairs and into the relative safety of the tunnels above, but my legs felt like lead, rooted to the spot. I was mesmerized, caught in the thrall of the ritual. As I watched, the hooded figures raised their hands towards the altar. In their hands they held gleaming daggers, the blades catching the lantern light. The chanting reached a crescendo, and a figure emerged from the shadows behind the altar. It was tall and gaunt, its skin pale and translucent, almost glowing in the dim light. It wore a robe of deep purple, embroidered with intricate gold symbols that I recognized from the Templar texts, symbols of forbidden knowledge, of powers beyond human comprehension. The figure raised its arms, and the chanting ceased abruptly. A silence descended upon the chamber, a silence so profound that it felt like a physical pressure against my eardrums. Then the figure spoke, its voice a dry, rasping whisper that seemed to echo from the depths of the earth itself. "The time has come," it whispered, the sound amplified by the vastness of the chamber. The time of the awakening. The hooded figures lowered their daggers and stepped forward, forming a tighter circle around the altar. They began to chant again, this time in a language I didn't recognize. It was a guttural, primal language that sent shivers down my spine. As they chanted, the air around the altar began to shimmer, and a faint, ethereal light began to emanate from the obsidian surface. The light grew stronger, brighter, until it filled the chamber, casting the hooded figures in an eerie glow. I shielded my eyes, momentarily blinded by the intensity of the light. When I could see again, the figure in purple was standing directly before the altar, its arms outstretched. The light pulsed and throbbed, forming a swirling vortex above the altar. Suddenly, a piercing scream echoed through the chamber. It was a sound of pure agony, of unimaginable suffering. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. The hooded figures continued to chant, their voices rising in a frenzy of sound. The light intensified, the vortex spinning faster and faster. Then, slowly, something began to emerge from the vortex. It was a shape, vaguely humanoid, but twisted and distorted, as if formed from shadows and smoke. Its limbs were long and spindly, ending in clawed hands. Its head was elongated, with a gaping maw, filled with razor-sharp teeth. Its eyes glowed with an unholy light, burning with a malevolent intelligence. The creature emerged fully from the vortex, and the chanting stopped. The hooded figures prostrated themselves before the altar, their faces pressed against the cold stone. The creature surveyed the chamber, its glowing eyes fixing on me. A low growl rumbled from its throat, a sound that vibrated through the very foundations of the earth. Terror, pure and unadulterated, flooded through me. I knew, with a certainty that went beyond reason, that I was facing something ancient and evil, something that should have remained locked away in the darkness for eternity. I clutched the Templar cross tighter, the only weapon I had against the horror before me. It felt inadequate, pathetically small against the overwhelming power radiating from the creature, but it was all I had. The creature took a step towards me, its eyes never leaving mine. The air crackled with unseen energy. I knew, with a dreadful certainty, that my journey into the Templar vault had reached its climax. This was the final confrontation, the ultimate test. And I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The chanting began again, low and ominous, a death knell echoing through the chamber. The creature's shadow stretched long across the floor, reaching for me, consuming me in its darkness. I entered the Templar vault under Jerusalem, Part 16. The whispers intensified, pressing against my sanity like unseen hands. I stumbled backwards, the chill of the chamber seeming to seep into my very bones. The symbol, pulsating with that sickly, unnatural light, began to rotate slowly. Its movement wasn't mechanical, but organic, like a living thing flexing beneath its stone skin. The air grew thick, heavy, charged with an energy that prickled my skin. "No," I breathed, my voice a rasp lost in the cavernous space. This can't be." The ground trembled, and a low, guttural growl echoed from the depths of the vault. It wasn't the sound of an animal, but something far older, something primal. The growl grew in intensity, morphing into a chilling, rhythmic chant. I recognized the language, the same archaic Latin inscribed on the tablets I'd found earlier. But the words, they were twisted, corrupted, a blasphemous parody of prayer. Fear, cold and paralyzing, gripped me. I wanted to run, to claw my way back through the tunnel, but my legs felt like lead. I was rooted to the spot, my eyes fixed on the rotating symbol. The light it emitted grew brighter, blindingly so, and within its luminescence, figures began to coalesce. They were humanoid, but grotesquely elongated, their limbs thin and spindly, their heads disproportionately large. Their skin was a sickly gray, stretched taut over bone, and their eyes were empty sockets filled with the same unholy light as the symbol. They floated, rather than walked, drifting towards me with an unnerving silence. The chanting intensified, a cacophony of voices that seemed to claw at the edges of my mind. I could feel their presence, a palpable wave of coldness that washed over me, stealing the warmth from my body, the breath from my lungs. I tried to scream, but my voice was trapped in my throat. I wanted to pray, to call upon any deity, any force, for protection, but my mind was a blank canvas of terror. All rational thought had fled, leaving only raw, primal fear. One of the figures, taller and more gaunt than the others, extended a hand towards me. Its fingers were impossibly long, tipped with claws that shimmered like obsidian. As it drew closer, I saw its face, or what passed for a face. There were no features, only smooth, stretched skin, and those vacant, luminous eyes. The chant reached a crescendo as the figure's hand brushed against my cheek. The touch was like ice, burning cold, and I felt a jolt of pure, unadulterated terror surge through me. It wasn't physical pain, but something far worse, a violation of my very being. Images flooded my mind, flashes of chaos and destruction, visions of a world consumed by fire and shadow. I saw the figures, these things, reigning over a desolate landscape, their chilling chant the only sound in a ruined world. The figure leaned closer, its empty eyes boring into mine. I could feel its breath, cold and fetid, on my face. The chanting subsided, replaced by a single voice, whispering directly into my ear. It spoke in the same twisted Latin, but I understood the meaning with terrifying clarity. "Join us," it whispered, its voice a chilling caress. "Become one with the ascended. Embrace the coming darkness." The images intensified, the whispers grew louder, and I felt myself slipping, losing my grip on reality. The fear was replaced by a strange sense of calm, a seductive emptiness. Part of me, a small, desperate part, still clung to sanity, to the memory of who I was, but it was a losing battle. The figure's hand tightened on my cheek, its claws digging into my skin. I felt a sharp pain, a burst of warmth, and then darkness. But it wasn't the blessed oblivion of unconsciousness. It was something else entirely. I was aware, but not of my physical body. I was floating, drifting in a sea of shadows, surrounded by the chanting voices. The images continued to flash before my eyes, scenes of horror and despair, and I felt a growing sense of belonging. The whispers became clearer, no longer a menacing threat, but a welcoming embrace. The darkness no longer felt cold and terrifying, but warm and comforting. I was being drawn in, absorbed into something vast and ancient, something beyond human comprehension. "Embrace the change," the whispers urged. "Become one with us." And I felt myself yielding, surrendering to the darkness, to the whispers, to the chilling promise of the ascended. I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that I was losing myself. I was becoming something else, something other. And in the depths of that encroaching darkness, a single, horrifying thought echoed in my mind. I was no longer alone. I entered the Templar vault under Jerusalem, Part 17. The chanting grew louder, resonating through the chamber like the beating of a monstrous heart. It pulsed in my ears, a guttural, inhuman rhythm that seemed to vibrate the very stone around me. I clutched the Templar cross, its cold metal, a small comfort against the rising tide of dread. Elias remained slumped against the wall, eyes wide and unseeing, his breath coming in ragged gasps. I edged closer to the archway, peering into the vast, circular chamber beyond. Torchlight flickered, casting dancing shadows across the walls, revealing grotesque carvings. Contorted figures intertwined with serpentine forms, their eyes hollow sockets staring out into the darkness. In the center of the chamber, a group of figures robed in crimson stood around a circular altar. Their chanting was the source of the unsettling sound, a droning, hypnotic cadence that made my stomach churn. The altar itself was disturbing. Carved from a single piece of black obsidian, it pulsed with a faint inner light. Resting atop it was a shape I couldn't quite make out, shrouded in a thick, swirling mist that seemed to writhe and shift like a living thing. The robed figures raised their hands in unison, their chanting reaching a fever pitch. The mist above the altar began to coalesce, taking on a more defined form. My heart hammered in my chest. Whatever ritual they were performing, it felt ancient, powerful, and deeply wrong. I had to stop them, but how? I was one man against a group of fanatics, armed only with a rusty sword and a cross whose power I barely understood. Elias was in no condition to help. A sudden, piercing scream echoed through the chamber. One of the robed figures staggered back from the altar, clutching their face. Their hands fell away, revealing skin that was bubbling and charred, as though touched by acid. The chanting faltered, the other figures turning to stare at their fallen comrade. This was my chance. Gripping the Templar cross, I charged into the chamber, yelling a wordless battle cry. My sword flashed, connecting with the nearest robed figure. The crimson fabric parted, revealing not flesh and blood but something else. Gray chitinous plates covered its body, and its face was a mask of insectoid features. Its multiple eyes blinked in surprise before focusing on me with chilling intensity. The other figures turned, their chant replaced by a series of clicking sounds. They moved with unnatural speed, their robes swirling around them like the wings of monstrous insects. I parried a blow from one of the creatures, the force of the impact jarring my arm. These weren't humans, not anymore. Whatever ritual they were performing, it had transformed them into something other. The fight was chaotic. I swung my sword wildly, desperate to keep them at bay. They darted and weaved, their movements unsettlingly fluid, their clicking sounds a constant, unnerving chorus. I managed to land a few blows, but their chitinous armor deflected most of my attacks. One of the creatures lunged at me, its mandibles snapping shut inches from my face. I stumbled back, narrowly avoiding its grasp. The air grew thick with a sickly, sweet smell, like rotting fruit. The mist above the altar intensified, swirling faster and faster. The shape within began to solidify, taking on the form of a... I couldn't believe my eyes. It was humanoid, but impossibly tall and thin, its limbs elongated and spindly. Its head was elongated, its face a blank slate except for two enormous black eyes that pulsed with an unholy light. The creatures stopped their attack, turning to face the emerging figure. They prostrated themselves before it, their clicking sounds intensifying into a cacophonous chorus of worship. The tall figure raised its hand, a gesture that seemed to command absolute obedience. The mist around it dissipated, revealing its full, terrifying form. Its skin was the color of parchment, stretched taut over its skeletal frame, its eyes fixed on me, and a wave of pure, unadulterated malice washed over me. I felt a pressure in my mind, a voice whispering promises of power, of knowledge, of eternal life. It was a seductive whisper, promising to fulfill my deepest desires. I squeezed my eyes shut, clutching the Templar cross tightly. The cold metal burned against my palm, a searing reminder of the world above, of the humanity I was clinging to. The whispering intensified, promising me everything I ever wanted, if only I would submit. But deep down, I knew the price of such a bargain. It would cost me my soul. I opened my eyes, the image of Eleanor flashing through my mind, a beacon of light in the encroaching darkness. I roared, a primal scream of defiance against the insidious whisper, against the monstrous figure before me, against the creeping despair that threatened to consume me. I raised the Templar cross, its surface now glowing with an intense, white light. The creatures recoiled, hissing and clicking in pain. The tall figure's eyes widened. A flicker of fear? Could it be? Was this abomination? This being of pure evil, afraid of a simple cross? The answer, I knew, lay in the chamber beyond, in the heart of the Templar vault, and with renewed determination, I prepared to face whatever horrors awaited me. I entered the Templar vault, under Jerusalem, part 18 of 25. The chanting, a discordant susurrus that vibrated through the very stone, grew louder. The echoing space of the chamber seemed to shrink, the walls closing in, not physically, but in a way that tightened my chest, constricted my breath. The air itself seemed to thicken, heavy with an unseen, oily presence. Fear, cold and slick, coated my insides. Father Michael, or what remained of him, continued his slow, agonizing crawl towards the altar. His eyes, vacant and black, were fixed on the pulsing light that emanated from the artifact, a grotesque parody of religious devotion. The glyphs on the walls seemed to writhe and shift in my peripheral vision, as if the very language of the Templars was recoiling from the unholy scene. I wanted to scream, to run, to claw my way back through the labyrinthine tunnels and into the blessed sunlight, but my legs felt leaden, rooted to the spot by a dreadful fascination. I was trapped, not by physical restraints, but by the creeping dread that filled the vault. As Father Michael reached the altar, the pulsating light intensified, bathing the chamber in an unnatural, sickly green glow. The chanting reached a fever pitch, and I could now distinguish words, though they were not in any language I recognized. It was a guttural, primal tongue that scraped against my sanity. Father Michael, with a strength I wouldn't have thought possible in his emaciated state, raised his head. His jaw hung open, and from within the darkness of his throat, a second voice emerged. Deeper, more resonant than the chanting, it spoke a single word, a word that resonated within my very bones, a word that I understood instinctively, despite never having heard it before. Dagon. The name echoed through the chamber, and the pulsing artifact on the altar responded. The green light flared, blindingly bright, and I squeezed my eyes shut, my hands flying to my face. I heard a sickening squelch, a wet, tearing sound, and then silence. When I dared to open my eyes, the green light had subsided, leaving the chamber bathed in an oppressive, almost tangible darkness. The chanting had stopped. The only sound was the frantic thumping of my own heart. Father Michael was gone. The altar, however, was no longer empty. In place of the pulsing artifact lay a thing. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, but its skin was a glistening, chitinous black. Its limbs were too long, too thin, ending in sharp talon-like claws. Its head was small, almost vestigial, perched atop a long, sinuous neck. And its eyes were enormous, multifaceted orbs that pulsed with the same sickly green light that the artifact had emitted. The creature, the thing that had once been Father Michael, turned its head towards me. Its eyes locked onto mine, and a wave of pure, unadulterated malevolence washed over me. It was an ancient evil, a cosmic horror that predated humanity, and in its gaze I saw the utter insignificance of my own existence. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. My mind screamed, urging me to flee, but my body remained frozen, paralyzed by terror. The creature took a step towards me, its movements unnervingly fluid, almost serpentine. Its claws clicked against the stone floor, the sound echoing through the silent chamber. Another step, and another. It was closing the distance between us, slowly, deliberately, savoring my fear. I could smell it now, a sickeningly sweet odor, like rotting fruit mixed with something metallic, something alien. I wanted to pray, to beg for forgiveness, for salvation, but my tongue felt thick and heavy in my mouth. No words came. Only the primal scream building in my throat, a scream I couldn't release. The creature was now only a few feet away. I could see the pulsating veins beneath its chitinous skin, the twitching muscles in its elongated limbs. Its eyes, those horrifying, multifaceted eyes, bored into mine, stripping away my sanity, layer by layer. It raised a claw, its sharp tip inches from my face. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But the blow didn't come. Instead, I heard a low, guttural growl, a sound that seemed to vibrate deep within my chest. Slowly, cautiously, I opened my eyes. The creature was still there, its claws still raised, but its gaze was no longer fixed on me. It was looking past me, towards the entrance of the chamber. And then I heard it, a faint scraping sound, followed by the click of stone against stone. Someone else was in the vault. I entered the Templar Vault under Jerusalem, Part 19. The echoing scrape of metal against stone seemed to reverberate through my very bones. The sarcophagus lid, despite its immense weight, was slowly, inexorably sliding open. The air, already heavy with the scent of dust and something anciently organic, grew thick, almost viscous. A pressure built in my ears, and a low hum, almost sub-audible, vibrated in the chamber. Elias, his face a mask of morbid fascination, held the lantern higher, the flickering light dancing over the widening gap. The first thing I saw wasn't a body but a tapestry, woven from a material that shimmered like liquid moonlight. It depicted a swirling vortex of stars, surrounding a single, malevolent eye. Even in the dim light, the eye seemed to pulse, to shift, as if observing us. I felt a sudden, irrational urge to avert my gaze, a primal fear gripping me. This wasn't a burial shroud, it was a warning. Elias, seemingly unaffected, reached out and gently pulled the tapestry aside. Beneath it, nestled within the sarcophagus, lay the figure. Not desiccated or skeletal as I had expected, but unnervingly preserved. The skin, though pale as alabaster, was smooth and taut. The figure was clad in the familiar Templar garb, the white surcoat emblazoned with the crimson cross. His hands, crossed over his chest, clutched a long, slender sword, its hilt encrusted with what looked like obsidian. But it was the face that truly stole my breath, that rooted me to the spot in horrified fascination. It was Baphomet. Not the grotesque, goat-headed deity of legend, but a human face, twisted into a horrifying parody of it. The eyes, wide and unblinking, held an unsettling gleam. The lips, pulled back in a rictus grin, revealed rows of needle-sharp teeth. And from the forehead, two small, polished horns, black as night, curved upwards. "By the cross," Elias breathed, his voice barely a whisper. He reached out a trembling hand towards the figure's face, as if to confirm what his eyes were telling him. "Don't touch it," I hissed, my voice raw with a terror I couldn't explain. Something about this being radiated an aura of profound wrongness. It felt like a violation, a sacrilege, simply to be in its presence. Elias paused, his hand hovering just above the figure's cheek. He seemed to be in a trance, drawn to it by some unseen force. The low hum in the chamber intensified, resonating with the pounding of my heart. The flickering lantern light danced across the Baphomet face, casting distorted, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and twist like living things. Suddenly, Elias gasped and recoiled, his hands snapping back as if burned. He stared at his fingers, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. They were tinged a sickly gray, and a thin black vein pulsed beneath the skin, rapidly spreading up his arm. "What is it?" I whispered, my own fear spiraling out of control. "What's happening?" He didn't answer. He just stared at the spreading darkness on his arm, his breathing becoming shallow and ragged. The hum in the chamber grew louder, morphing into a low, guttural chant. The air grew colder, and the scent of decay intensified, now mingled with something metallic, like blood. The Baphomet figure within the sarcophagus stirred. Its eyes, those unsettling, gleaming eyes, seemed to lock onto mine. The rictus grin widened, revealing even more of those needle-sharp teeth. And then, slowly, agonizingly, it began to rise. Panic clawed at my throat. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen, rooted to the spot by an unseen force. Elias, whimpering softly, collapsed to his knees, clutching his arm as the black veins continued to spread, now creeping up his neck and across his face. The figure sat up, its movements jerky and unnatural. It reached out, its gray, almost translucent hand extending towards Elias. The obsidian-hilted sword slipped from its grasp, clattering against the stone floor with a chilling ring. As the figure's hand neared Elias, the chanting grew louder, filling the chamber with a cacophony of disembodied voices. The walls seemed to pulsate, the air to vibrate. I felt a crushing pressure in my chest, as if the very air was being sucked from my lungs. Then, with a sudden, sickening crunch, the figure's hand closed around Elias's head. A high-pitched scream, cut short, echoed through the chamber. The figure's grin widened further, revealing rows upon rows of those needle-sharp teeth, now stained crimson. And in that moment, I knew, this wasn't a tomb. It was a prison. And we had just released something truly horrific upon the world. Something that had been locked away for centuries, waiting, patiently, for its freedom. And now, it was my turn. I entered the Templar Vault under Jerusalem, Part 20. The echoing silence after the chanting ceased was more terrifying than the sound itself. The air, thick with the smell of ozone and something ancient, something unholy, pressed in on me. My torch flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. The Maltese cross on the floor, previously dull, now pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence. It was a sickly green, like phosphorescent algae, blooming on a stagnant pond. I looked back at Thomas. His eyes were still closed, his face pale and drawn, but the tremors had stopped. A thin trickle of blood ran from his nose, and his lips moved silently, as if whispering a prayer or a curse. I didn't dare touch him. Something in the stillness warned me to stay away. The Maltese cross began to glow brighter, the green light spreading outwards, creeping along the lines etched into the stone floor. The light pulsed with a rhythm, slow and deliberate, like a beating heart. Each pulse resonated within my chest, a physical pressure that stole my breath. Fear, cold and clammy, gripped me with an icy hand. Then, from the depths of the vault, a low groan echoed. It wasn't a human sound. It was the sound of stone grinding against stone, of the earth shifting in its sleep. The groaning grew louder, accompanied by a rhythmic scraping, like something immense dragging itself across the rough-hewn floor. Terror choked me. I wanted to run, to claw my way back through the tunnels, but my legs felt leaden, rooted to the spot. The green light now filled the chamber, casting an eerie glow that revealed details I hadn't noticed before. Carvings on the walls, obscured by centuries of grime, now stood out in stark relief. They depicted grotesque figures, twisted and contorted, their limbs elongated, and their eyes bulging. They seemed to be reaching out, grasping, their silent screams etched into the stone. The scraping sound grew closer, louder, and the ground beneath my feet began to tremble. I glanced at Thomas. He had opened his eyes, but they were unfocused, glazed over. He didn't seem to see me, or the glowing cross, or the horrific carvings on the walls. He just stared straight ahead, a vacant expression on his face. Then, from the darkness at the far end of the vault, it emerged. It was huge, a hulking mass of shadow and stone. Its form shifted and writhed, making it difficult to discern its true shape. At first, it seemed like a grotesque parody of a human, towering over us, its limbs disproportionately long and thin. Then, as it moved closer, it seemed to morph, to become something else, something less human, more monstrous. Its surface shimmered, as though composed of 1,000 moving parts, and the green light reflected off it in a sickening, oily sheen. I couldn't breathe. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The creature, whatever it was, moved with a slow, deliberate grace that was utterly terrifying. Each step sent tremors through the floor, and the air grew colder, thicker, making it difficult to even draw a breath. As it approached, details began to emerge from the shifting darkness. I saw glimpses of what looked like bone, protruding from its flesh-like surface, and then the eyes. 2 burning embers, glowing with the same sickly green light as the Maltese cross, fixed on me with a malevolence that chilled me to the bone. It stopped a few feet from us, its immense form filling the chamber. The air crackled with an unseen energy, and the smell of ozone intensified, making my eyes water. The groaning stopped, replaced by a low, guttural growl that resonated deep within my chest. The creature lowered its head, its massive form casting me in shadow. I could feel its gaze, burning into me, stripping away my layers of fear and leaving me exposed, vulnerable. It raised a hand, if it could be called a hand, a twisted appendage of bone and shadow, and reached towards me. I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable. I felt a cold touch on my forehead, like ice against my skin. A voice, ancient and resonant, whispered in my ear, a language I didn't understand but somehow, instinctively, knew. It spoke of power, of dominion, of a darkness older than time itself. Then, the touch was gone. I opened my eyes. The creature had retreated, its form receding back into the darkness. The green light faded, and the Maltese cross on the floor returned to its dull, lifeless state. The silence returned, heavier now, pregnant with an unspoken dread. I looked at Thomas. He was still staring straight ahead, but the vacant expression was gone. In its place was something else, something cold, something that made my blood run cold. He slowly turned his head towards me, and a chilling smile spread across his face. "It has chosen," he whispered, his voice hollow and distant. "It has chosen you." I entered the Templar vault under Jerusalem, Part 21. The chanting swelled, vibrating through the very bedrock beneath Jerusalem. The Baphomet idol, its goat head gleaming in the flickering torchlight, seemed to pulse with a sickening life. Around it, the robed figures swayed, their faces obscured by cowls, their voices rising in a dissonant chorus that scraped against my sanity. Elias, still clutching the Templar sword, stood frozen, his eyes locked on the monstrous idol. A trickle of blood ran down his temple, lost in the shadows cast by his hood. I tried to speak, to break the horrifying spell that had fallen over us, but my voice caught in my throat, a dry rasp. The air grew thick, heavy, with an unnatural stillness that pressed against my chest, stealing my breath. The torches sputtered, casting grotesque, dancing shadows across the chamber walls, turning the ancient carvings into writhing, demonic visages. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones, a certainty that something terrible, something irreversible, was about to happen. One of the robed figures stepped forward, his cowl falling back to reveal a face that haunted my nightmares, pale, gaunt, with eyes that burned with an unnatural fervor. It was the man from my visions, the one who had led the Templars in their blasphemous rituals centuries ago. He raised a skeletal hand, silencing the chant. A terrifying silence descended, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water echoing through the vast chamber. He spoke, his voice a raspy whisper that seemed to claw its way out of the depths of the earth. "The time has come," he rasped, his words echoing in the oppressive silence. "The seal is broken. The gate is open." My blood ran cold. I knew instinctively what he meant. The seal he spoke of was the protective barrier that the Templars had erected around the thing they had imprisoned beneath the city. The thing I had sensed lurking in the darkness, the source of the growing unease that had permeated the vault since we entered. Elias, as if jolted awake, let out a choked cry. "No!" he shouted, his voice hoarse. "You cannot unleash it. The world is not ready." The figure let out a dry, chilling chuckle. "The world will be remade," he hissed, "cleansed in fire and blood, and we, the chosen, will rule over the ashes." He turned towards the Baphomet idol, raising his arms in supplication. "Arise, O Ancient One! Claim your dominion!" The ground beneath us trembled. The chanting resumed, louder, more frantic, fueled by a desperate, terrifying energy. The Baphomet idol began to glow, a sickly green light emanating from its eyes. Cracks appeared on the chamber floor, spreading like spiderwebs across the ancient stone. The air grew thick with the stench of sulfur, and a low, guttural growl echoed from the depths below. I looked at Elias, desperation clawing at me. We had to stop them. We had to do something. But what? We were outnumbered, outmatched, trapped in a vault miles beneath the earth with a thing about to be unleashed. He met my gaze, his eyes wide with fear, but also with a newfound resolve. He gripped the Templar sword tighter, its hilt gleaming in the eerie green light. "We have to seal it again," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "even if it costs us our lives." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. I had no weapon, no training, just a desperate will to survive, to prevent the horror unfolding before us from consuming the world above. I picked up a loose stone from the floor, a pathetic defense against the ancient evil that was about to be unleashed, but it was all I had. The chanting reached a fever pitch. The ground shook violently. The cracks in the floor widened, revealing a chasm filled with a swirling black mist. From within the mist, I could hear the growl again, closer now, louder, filled with a chilling hunger. The figure at the altar threw back his head and let out a triumphant cry. "It is done!" he shrieked. "The Master has returned!" Then, the ground beneath us gave way. We plunged into the darkness, the screams of the cultists echoing around us as we fell into the abyss. The stench of sulfur intensified, choking the air from my lungs. The green light from the Baphomet idol faded above us, swallowed by the encroaching darkness. I landed hard, the air knocked from my lungs. I lay there for a moment, disoriented, trying to catch my breath in the suffocating air. Then, I heard it. The growl. It was right next to me. I scrambled to my feet, my hand desperately clutching the stone. Through the swirling black mist, I could make out a shape, massive, monstrous, unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was the thing they had imprisoned, the thing they had worshipped, the thing that was now free. And it was hungry. The chanting continued, a distant, distorted echo from the chamber above. But now another sound joined it, a low, guttural chuckle that seemed to vibrate through the very earth itself, the chuckle of something ancient, something powerful, something evil. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that we were not alone in the darkness. We were prey. I entered the Templar Vault under Jerusalem, Part 22. The chanting grew louder, resonating deep within my bones, a vibration that threatened to shatter my sanity. The pulsating red light from the Seal of Solomon was now casting grotesque shadows that danced and writhed across the cavern walls, transforming familiar shapes into monstrous apparitions. The air grew thick, heavy, tasting of dust and something ancient, something indescribably foul. I fumbled with the Crusader's sword, the cold steel a meager comfort against the rising terror. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the ground beneath the seal began to tremble. Cracks spiderwebbed across the ancient stone, glowing with the same infernal red light. Dust rained down, choking the air. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wanted to scream, to run, but my feet were rooted to the spot, held captive by an unseen force. The Templar's voice, thin and reedy, cut through the chanting. The gate opens. The Master returns. The tremor intensified. The cracks in the floor widened, revealing a chasm below, filled with that swirling crimson mist. The chanting reached a fever pitch, a cacophony of inhuman voices echoing from the depths. Within the swirling mist, shapes began to coalesce, shadowy figures that twisted and contorted, their forms vaguely humanoid, yet utterly alien. I squeezed my eyes shut, unable to bear the sight. The ground heaved violently, throwing me off balance. I stumbled, the Crusader's sword clattering across the stone. When I opened my eyes again, the chasm had widened, consuming the Seal of Solomon. The red light pulsed even stronger, bathing the cavern in a hellish glow. Emerging from the chasm, slowly and deliberately, was a figure unlike any I had ever seen. It was tall and gaunt, draped in what looked like decaying robes of crimson and black. Its face was obscured by a deep cowl, but I could sense its gaze, a palpable weight that pressed down on me, stealing my breath. Surrounding the figure, the shadowy forms danced and cavorted, their movements mirroring its own. The chanting stopped. A profound silence descended upon the cavern, broken only by the soft dripping of water from unseen stalactites. The air crackled with an unnatural energy. I felt a strange pull towards the figure, a compulsion to approach it, to kneel before it. I fought against it, every fiber of my being screaming in protest. The figure raised a skeletal hand, its fingers long and spindly, tipped with what looked like polished obsidian claws. A voice, deep and resonant, filled the cavern, a voice that seemed to echo from the beginning of time. It spoke in a language I didn't understand, yet somehow I knew its meaning. It was a greeting, a welcome, an invitation. The Templar, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe, prostrated himself before the figure. "Master," he croaked, his voice hoarse with reverence, "you have returned." The figure made a gesture, a slow, deliberate movement of its hand. The Templar rose, his eyes now burning with an unnatural light. He turned towards me, a chilling smile spreading across his face. "Come, brother," he said, his voice transformed, no longer the voice of the man I had known, but something cold and alien. "Join us. Embrace the Master's gift." I shook my head, my body trembling. I clutched the hilt of the Crusader's sword, the cold steel grounding me, anchoring me to reality. "No," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I won't." The Templar's smile widened, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too pointed. "You have no choice," he hissed, his voice laced with menace. "The Master's will is absolute." He lunged towards me, his movements inhumanly fast. I raised the Crusader's sword, blocking his attack. The steel clashed against something hard and cold. I recoiled, the force of the blow sending tremors up my arm. The Templar attacked again, a whirlwind of motion, his eyes blazing with a terrifying intensity. I parried his blows, desperately, trying to defend myself. I was no match for his speed, his strength. He pressed his attack, forcing me back towards the chasm, towards the swirling crimson mist and the shadowy figures that danced within. The figure in the robes watched, its face still hidden beneath the cowl. It made no move to intervene, its silence more terrifying than any scream. I knew then, with chilling certainty, that this was the end. The Templar would overcome me, and I would be dragged into the chasm, consumed by the darkness that waited below. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable, but instead of the Templar's attack, I heard a different sound, a low, guttural growl, emanating from the chasm. It grew louder, deeper, shaking the very foundations of the cavern. The Templar paused, his eyes widening in surprise. He turned towards the chasm, a look of dawning horror spreading across his face. The shadowy figures within the mist began to writhe and convulse, their movements no longer graceful but frantic, desperate. The figure in the robes stiffened, its skeletal hand clenching into a fist. The red light from the chasm pulsed erratically, casting grotesque shadows that danced and flickered across the walls. Something was happening, something far more terrible than anything I could have imagined. And I had the sinking feeling that whatever it was about to be unleashed. I entered the Templar vault under Jerusalem, Part 23. The chanting grew louder, resonating through the cavern like the death knell of a forgotten god. The air, thick with the smell of incense and something far fouler, vibrated with an unseen force. My torch flickered, casting grotesque shadows that danced with a macabre energy. I clutched the Crusader's sword, its cold steel offering a meager comfort against the encroaching darkness. Ahead, the cavern opened into a vast, circular chamber. In the center, bathed in an unnatural pulsating light, was the altar. Not of stone, as I'd imagined, but of something resembling polished bone, intricately carved with scenes of unspeakable ritual. Around it, the hooded figures swayed in a rhythmic, hypnotic dance. Their chanting had reached a fever pitch, a guttural symphony of dread. I realized with a cold certainty that I was witnessing something ancient, something unholy, a ritual that had slumbered for centuries, now awakened by my intrusion. A part of me, the sane part, screamed to turn back, to flee this cursed place and never look back. But another part, a morbid curiosity, a fatalistic acceptance, held me rooted to the spot. I watched, transfixed, as the figures reached the crescendo of their chant. The pulsating light from the altar intensified, washing the chamber in a sickly green glow. Then, one of the figures stepped forward, their hood falling back to reveal a face that haunted me even in the flickering light. It wasn't human. The skin was stretched taut over the skull, the eyes black and devoid of pupils, the mouth a gaping maw filled with needle-sharp teeth. It raised a hand, skeletal and gnarled, and from the altar it retrieved a dagger. The blade, obsidian black, seemed to absorb the light around it. Another figure was pushed forward, struggling against the grasp of the others. This one was human, or at least had been. Their clothes were ragged, their skin pallid and drawn. Fear, pure and unadulterated, shone in their eyes. As the creature raised the dagger, I knew I had to act. With a roar that tore through the silence, I charged forward. The Crusader's sword held high. The chanting faltered, the figures turning to face me, their movements suddenly stiff and unnatural. I cleaved through the first figure, the blade meeting surprisingly little resistance. It collapsed in a heap, its robes falling away to reveal not flesh and bone, but dust and shadows. The others hissed, a sound like dry leaves rustling in a winter wind. They moved towards me, their movements slow and deliberate, but with an undeniable menace. I fought with a desperate fury, the sword a blur of steel in the flickering torchlight. The figures fell around me, dissolving into dust and shadows, yet more seemed to rise from the darkness to take their place. I was outnumbered, outmatched, yet I fought on, driven by a primal instinct for survival. The creature at the altar shrieked, a high-pitched, ear-splitting sound that sent a wave of nausea through me. The human sacrifice slumped to the ground, seemingly lifeless. The creature then turned its gaze upon me, its black eyes burning with an unholy fire. It moved with a speed that belied its skeletal frame, crossing the distance between us in a blink of an eye. The obsidian dagger flashed, aimed at my heart. I parried the blow, the impact jarring my arm. The creature pressed its attack, a whirlwind of fury and malice. I fought back, desperate to keep it at bay. The air grew colder, the chanting resuming, deeper and more menacing than before. The pulsating light from the altar intensified, casting long, distorted shadows that danced around us. I felt a strange pull towards the altar, a seductive whisper promising power and knowledge. I realized then that this was their goal, to break me, to corrupt me, to make me one of them. I gritted my teeth, pushing back against the insidious influence, the seductive whispers. I would not fall. I would not succumb to the darkness. The creature lunged again, the obsidian dagger grazing my arm. I stumbled back, my strength failing. The chanting reached a deafening crescendo. The altar pulsed with an unholy light. I knew, with a sickening certainty, that I was losing. The darkness was closing in. The whispers were growing louder. And then, a voice, clear and strong, cut through the chanting, a voice I recognized, a voice I thought I would never hear again. Elias. I looked up, my vision blurred with sweat and blood. Standing at the entrance to the chamber, silhouetted against the faint glow of the tunnel behind her, was Sarah. To be continued. I entered the Templar vault under Jerusalem, Part 24. The chanting intensified, vibrating through the very stone beneath my feet, a guttural resonance that seemed to burrow into my skull. My torch flickered wildly, casting dancing, demonic shadows that mimicked the pulsating glyphs on the walls. Elias, eyes wide and glazed, swayed rhythmically, his arms outstretched as though embracing some unseen presence. He began to speak, but it wasn't his voice. It was deeper, rasping, ancient. Words I didn't understand, yet instinctively feared, poured from his